Right, there's a whole series of questions you asked there, David. Let me try and answer them all in sequence. I think the first thing with regards to terrace properties and Toxteth Street in particular, I came to work in East Manchester some 9-10 years ago now, and I think it's fair to say that there were some areas of terraced housing that had serious problems. I think East Manchester, Manchester as a whole, but particularly East Manchester, there's a high proportion of small two-bedroom back of pavement terraced housing. I think we rated out about 4,500 properties out of the 9,000 properties in Openshaw, Beswick and Clayton are small terrace properties. There was an issue with regards to, and again, areas like Toxteth Street and Lower Beswick that was cleared in 2001. Large numbers of empty properties, very low values had collapsed, very poor property conditions, a large proportion of privately rented accommodation, very few owner-occupiers. We were always clear that the housing market in East Manchester was dying. There was big problems about the housing market, and what we needed to do is to challenge and change the housing market. We needed to bring more choice in. People wanted to move into the housing market. Quite often they needed to move out of East Manchester. We identified certain areas which were priority, and Toxteth Street was one of them, and since 2001 we've been working with local residents. We've done a whole series of consultation events there, talking about what local people wanted to see. And what local people told us significantly was they did want, we were quite surprised because when we first went to them, we were proposing, I think it was about 60% demolition. Local people said that wasn't enough, and what they wanted to see was more demolition and more new builds. They wanted to aspire to new properties, to bigger properties, to better properties. And we revised the plans with our developer Lovell and came to a position where probably about 75% of houses will be demolished and the rest will be renewed. Now, it takes, in such a scheme, particularly got an existing community, cannot happen overnight, and it's taken us till about 8-9 months ago that we started building on that site. The first properties will be completed in October, and residents will be moving into those properties in November onwards. It is because, one of the things you talked about was keeping communities together. We've made it absolutely clear that every person that was living there at the time will have the right to a new property, and the owner-occupiers will have the right to move to remain as owner-occupiers, and that the difference between the value of their property and the value of a new property we would make sure we would bridge with an equity loan. So we wanted to keep the community together. We wanted to make sure that it was affordable for people. The difficulty we have, because of the tightness of the site, we can't afford just to move everyone out, demolish everything, rebuild it all and move them all back, because it just won't work. And what you'll find is people will move on and never come back. So we have to do it on a phased basis, and that's why it's taken as long as it's taking. The plans that the press have come out with this, or they've been in the press this week about alternative plans for Toxteth Street, I just think is the debate was 6 years ago, not now. The opportunity was there. It's interesting to save Britain's heritage, and the architects, they're not local people. There are a couple of local people that are involved in this, but the vast majority of local people are desperately waiting and want the process of demolition and rebuild to be accelerated. I just don't think it's acceptable in terms of people from outside this area to be coming and telling us what we should be doing without consulting local people. So, I just think it's a publicity stunt in many ways. I think, the stage we're at Toxteth Street, if you go down to Toxteth Street today, the conditions that people are living in are good, and what we're trying to do is to manage the area better, to make sure that we eradicate some of the problems that people are suffering there, dump rubbish, empty properties being broken into. Yeah, there's no one answer to that, because it depends on, each area is different, and what we've made absolutely clear in East Manchester, there are plenty of properties, particularly old terrace properties, that are need to be refurbished, need to be brought back into use. It depends on the quality, the condition of them, how many are empty, what the tenure mix of those properties are. Before any decisions taken as to whether we can afford to go down the route, it is not a cheap route to go down. There are plenty of places that we've talked previously about, you know, whether we should look to demolish, and we're now actually taking the decision that we can't afford to demolish because of the increase in house values in East Manchester over the last 7 or 8 years means that we're no longer able to do that in many areas, and what we're looking to do is to refurbish properties, which I see as a positive. You know, the housing market in 2000 was dead in East Manchester. Most people had negative equity. You could buy a property for as little as £1,400. 1 in every 5 properties was empty. People were desperate to move out, didn't want to stay. Conditions were very poor. That's changed, not, you know, everywhere, but it's changed in many parts where values have gone up significantly. People have improved their own stock. We've refurbished a lot of properties through facelift schemes, and the housing market as a whole has been on the upturn. You know, we know that there's been a bit of a blip recently with the economic conditions that are affecting the whole country and wider. So all I would say about that question is that, you know, there are a whole series of factors before a decision is taken, and no decisions are taken without very, very clear consultation with people. We are, you know, that there are a number of schemes that we're doing at the moment in terms of, and Toxteth Street is the biggest one, where demolition and new build is happening, but there's probably far, far more schemes in East Manchester where we've gone down the refurbishment option, and it's whatever it's right for that particular area. You mentioned about what's happening in Salford with Chimney Pot Park, and, you know, I'd argue that that isn't actually a refurbishment scheme, because what Urban Splash have done, everyone's moved out, they've acquired all the properties. The only thing they've kept is the front facade, largely, and what they've done is built a new property, you know, behind that front facade, and then people have moved back in. But the people have moved back in, I think there's very, very few, if any of the original people have moved back in. I think that's just a new development under a different name. Yes, it's keeping the heritage of Old Terrace Street, but the only thing that remains is the Terrace Street and the front facade. Everything else is new. I don't think you can compare it. And, you know, the other thing I'd say about the scheme is it's incredibly expensive. It would be probably just as expensive to demolish and build new rather than what they have done. So what I'd say is that, you know, what we've done in Toxteth Street is been working with that community for a long, long time. We know that the whole community is not, you know, 100% behind it, because you'll never get that in a community, but the majority of residents have clearly made their decision that they would like to see new properties built, and they didn't want to see the old properties retained. So that's what we're doing in Toxteth Street.